The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to our MWF webinar. For those of you who are new with us today, our principal software, MWF, which stands for Metal Wood Framer, is our automated Revit wall, floor, ceiling, and truss framing software for light gauge steel and also for wood modeling. Today, our senior technician, Christina, will be covering all the new features available within our latest MWF build, which is version 2.37.7250. We've made improvements to our wall module, our shop drawings, and also our floor module. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. If you are unfamiliar with MWF, we highly encourage you to take a look online at our products and also to reach out to us after the webinar to set up a demo one-on-one with one of our technicians. Our technicians will be able to take you through how you build and also how our MWF modules can benefit your next project. As usual, anyone who is registered for the webinar will be sent a recording automatically. And lastly, I would just like to remind everyone that you can ask questions throughout the webinar in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar dashboard. We'll get to them at the end of the webinar or after the webinar. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to hand off to Christina now.
Okay, hi everyone, good morning. So let me just minimize this. Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone again. Like I mentioned with Tanya, we're going to kind of cover the main new features in this new release. So we're going to start off with some features in the walls. So some of those include just panel weights, some updates to the markers, and some new features, which we'll go over obviously. We'll go take a look at these shop drawings in the walls as well. It's probably the biggest overhaul we've done to the software. And then we'll wrap up with some little features in the floors that we've done. So just the first one that we're going to take a look at today is just the panel weight added to the panel manager. So for those of you who are familiar with this command in the panel manager, the panel weights have been here already before. For basic single layer panels, we've just updated them now to include sheathing. So for those of you who sheathe your panels, there is a density option in the actual panel. So we'll now be able to pick up that parameter and you'll get accurate weights for the panel. So once that's filled in with your family, we can pick up the total weight of that panel. So that's the first little update. Always handy to have an accurate weight for your entire panel. The next one is just a slight update to the H-stud marker. For those of you who aren't too familiar with it, it is something that's in our marker manager. And it's a fairly particular stud pack, but we've just done some updates to it. So what you're able to do now is add a certain number of repeats on either side, so on the left side or on the right side of that stud pack. And we've also added the option to convert the stud pack marker to a subassembly. So if you do need a separate shop drawing for just that built-up stud pack, if it's welded, pre-assembled, you're able to create the separate shop drawing with those subassembly options. So again, you just place that marker like you would any of our other stud pack markers. And it is fairly particular. Gives you your H-stud formation, and you can add as many members again to either side. So just another little feature with that guy. The next one, for those of you who use Holddowns or anchors and are familiar with that command, we've just done a pretty simple update. We've added a new family to these Holddowns. So now when these are enabled, We have our typical Simpson strong tie. Those were there in our previous release. We've also just added a rigid clip connector family. 3 basic types for you to select from. And all the other typical hold down settings still apply with this new family. So again, for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with this guy, you have the option to insert bottom anchors. You can place by offset. For this particular example, I'm just going to go ahead and place it on my regular vertical studs. So it'll save to your template since it's done obviously through the panel's properties. So once these families are loaded in, you'll be able to save them and it'll auto-generate throughout your entire project. And again, for those who are a little unfamiliar with the hold down options, everything's quantified, labeled, it has its own ID. You'll be able to use this in a takeoff. So that's just a little update we've done to the hold downs. The next one on the list, number 4, is actually a relatively new feature. It was designed specifically to be able to add cap tracks using our marker lines. So this is going to be another new marker that you'll first load in when you're loading in your data. So you can always bring this into an existing project, no problem. You just have to reload your data. So beforehand, we used to only have this option available in the deflection connectors. So this is something that's new. You can add it to any existing member in the panel, and like I mentioned, it is done by marker line, so you can really virtually add it to any panel in the project. But like most of our commands, you just select the size for the cap family. You can give it a specific member designation if you're capping your cripples, your door jambs. Particular line style, if you want a specific one, these are just loaded in from your Revit project. So these options here, just some justification options, how they place, if they're offsetted. By default, it'll just hit the center of your marker line. So you do have the option to customize the length of the cap. I'll just leave mine at the default 1 foot. And you've got 5 basic configurations to choose from. So like I mentioned, you can use it to cap if need be, but we also do have a few other options. I'm just going to go ahead and select the back-to-back option. And I'll use it when it's crossing a vertical stud. So again, if your marker line runs through multiple types of members, you can pick which member you actually want to double up. And of course, there's always that sub-assembly option. So again, let's go ahead and place this by marker line. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with this. It's one of our more popular commands. And then in the bottom option here, where you've got your stud packs, you'll have the extra one here for the cap track. So you can see it running just there. And again, if you're familiar with the marker line options, you know that you can move these around, copy them. As soon as you refresh the panel, you'll have those members there wherever the line runs. So fairly easy option and pretty useful. It can be used for a plethora of things. So after the cap track, keeping with that marker theme, we've done another update to the MultiSystem marker. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with the MultiSystem marker, it's basically where you'll find most of the built-up options. A lot of box headers live in here. Basically, if it's not done with one of our default bearing options, it's usually done with the MultiSystem marker. So like I mentioned, just a plethora of configurations in here and some built-up options as well. So this is all still from the previous build. What we have added this time around is the option to add control joint cripples. So this is the same idea for those who are familiar with the control joint option in the panel's properties. In the miscellaneous, we've essentially just brought that into the MultiSystem marker. And what this lets you do is basically add some extra top or bottom cripples, and you can pretty easily control the offsets, where they're placed. I'm just going to add a member by activating this. I have the option again to pick any kind of structural column. You've got the number of cripples, so if you do want to add 2, 3 cripples in a pack, you can do that through here. And there's also the option to offset from kings, so you can move it laterally. So a few different options just to really specify where this cripple has to go. So one of the options as well, you can specify the length if need be in reference to the top or bottom of the cripple member. So if you do want it to come in short, change the cutback slightly, you can always specify length. I'm just going to go the full length. It'll stay the other full lengths like my other cripples. So I've already got it applied to this interior wall. It's got a basic box header on this door opening. So you can see I've got my built-up cripples on the end. They appear on both sides by default. And like I mentioned, if you wanted to add offsets, you can really add cripples wherever you need to for this header. And I've also just got my basic box header with the MultiSystem marker. So those are the main options we've done to the markers. Next, we'll take a look at another small option. Let's go back to that interior wall. So for those of you who are familiar with some of the manufacturing options on the side, we've done just an update to the bearing track. So what this command lets you do essentially is just place an HSS or an I-beam. You can really pick any structural framing member, and it'll add an extra member to your track. So it'll essentially double up your top track. So you have the option to add deflections in here, different track offsets. That's always been the same. We've just added the option now to convert these two members again into a subassembly. So if it's something that's welded, if you have a double top track, or if it's built up, pre-assembled beforehand, as with anything in the subassemblies, you can create a separate shop drawing for just this guy. So the last three commands that we'll take a look at specific to the walls. For multi-layer, a little update, but it's always handy to know. We've now just updated this so it appears in alphabetical order, much easier on the eyes. So if you do have multiple maps in the project, it'll be a little bit easier to sift through those. But the main update that we've really done to multi-layer is to the sheathing. So for those of you, again, who use sheathing, this may come in handy for some of your more slender walls. We do give you, again, some ready-made sheathing families that you can use right out of the gate. But their layout settings basically depend on how you want them to lap, on which type of stud, if you'd like to stagger them or just leave them tiled. But what we've added is this option called a placeholder. So this placeholder option, relatively simple. Like I mentioned, if you do have a bit more of a slender wall, we do try and break the sheets according to the spacing. Make sure it always laps on a stud. But if you do have a smaller wall, this guy's just about under 4 feet. And I'm using 4x12 sheets. I can always go to the placeholder option. Let's edit that. And what this enables me to do is basically just place one sheet for the entirety of the wall. So I just have pretty much one 4x12 sheet encasing that entire wall. So it is something, again, you can save to your template. And if you did have a one-off option where you had just a huge sheet placed on a particular wall, you can just change that to the placeholder. It's not going to break it on any particular stud. So those are two little updates done to multi-layer. But the last one that I really do want to show off, it's been anticipated when I've spoken to a few of you guys over the phone, and that is the edits wand. So if you're familiar with our edit commands, you know at this point that if you do want to manually do anything with Revit, copy paste a member, move it, delete it, you are kind of limited to our edit commands. So you do have to run these individually. If you wanted to delete, if you wanted to add a structural member, you would have to run these commands separately. So one nice feature that we've just added is something called the edits wand, and it basically negates the reason to use the other commands. So what you can do with this really is if you do copy paste a member, I can move it as well, do a whole slew of Revit edits, and instead of having to run each of these individually, I can go ahead and run the edits wand. It calculates the edits for me, and basically it saves those to the panel in one click. So overall, I think this will save a little bit of time just by not having to go through each individual command. So that's a nice feature. I like it quite a bit. Okay. So those are the major updates that we've done to the walls. Now we're going to take a look at probably the biggest overhaul, like I mentioned, and that has been done to the shop drawings. So shop drawings for single layer panels, if you're just placing a steel, or if you're using multi-layer to place sheathing or secondary layers, both those drawing options can now be found in these two buttons. So we still do have what we call our V1 drawing options, our version 1 drawing options. So if you're still using these, it's completely fine. You can continue using them in this next release. Just as a warning though, these will most likely disappear with our next big release in the next few months. So if you're definitely starting shop drawings from scratch, I recommend for sure using our new shop drawing engine. It's a lot more intuitive, gives you a lot more options. And it definitely is the most work we've done to the build thus far. So for those of you who are already using the drawing settings and multi-layer, this window will look a little different. If you're starting from scratch, we've given you a default 11 by 17 to start off with. And this has basically some preset view options. It's got a sheet already set up, so it's definitely great just so you can hit the ground running and start off with this one. So first little thing you'll notice in here, I mentioned that it now supports multi-layer as well as single layer. So you've got the two separate shop drawings in one cohesive window. So if you also wanted separate shop drawings, you can have two sets in the same window, one for multi-layer and one for standard. It'll associate the same view options, so you only really have to create the set of drawings once. So what we'll look at first in the shop drawings are just some options that have been added to the sheet properties. So let's go back in here. So this, for any of you who've set up shop drawings, will look familiar. It's still relatively the same. You have your sheet, you have your zones associated to that sheet. And for these multi-layer drawings, we've just brought over these options from our version 1. So you now have the option to specify your sheet naming. If you want to specify your sheet numbering as well, we've brought over those options. So you can do it by your panel name, your panel number, and we've brought over all the positioning options now, which we'll talk about in a bit. But you can now use panel positioning to position your panels as well with the multi-layer drawings. The other option that we do have for those of you who use panel stacker, that sheet stamp that we give on our shop drawings, which you can use in panel stacker to locate the PDFs essentially. So that sheet stamp has now been brought in to our multi-layer drawings. So it is there if you use panel stacker. So the main thing I want to talk about is the option that we've done to the multi-layer drawings. So again, if you add new views to your drawings, this will look slightly different. And those of you who aren't familiar with multi-layer drawings just yet, instead of single layer where we have a preset list of views to choose from, you can only have one elevation, one floor plan. In multi-layer drawings, we give you the option to add as many views as you want. So you can have multiple elevation views, and those can be singled out by the layers in your wall, or if you just want an exterior view of the wall, an interior view, you have the option to do that as well. So these will look slightly different. If I go to my framing elevation, so we've got, again, all these dimensioning options. If you're using diagonals in the panel, this is something that's new. We've added the option for angled braces, so you can dimension diagonals running through your structural layer. You'll also see options for the cap tracks here. So we've added dimensions for those. So the main thing I want to talk about is the labeling and the positioning. So for labeling, all those options that you've seen in single layer where you have the option to label by schedule, by positioning. If you're using a CNC rule former, you can usually label by advanced positioning. So all those options have been brought into multi-layer. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on the positioning option, since that's one of the newer ones that we've brought in. And if you're not familiar with the regular wall positioning, basically we have member positioning. And all this really does is give you an overall count of identical members in your project. So I can let this run. It'll find everything that's identical and give it one ID and a total count. So this is particularly for the steel with our member positioning. But once you run that, you can go ahead and run panel positioning. So again, if you're not familiar with this, this just lets you associate one ID to all your panels that are identical, and then this is a label that you can bring in and use in your shop drawings. So I've got a few panels that are identical. I've got the count, and it'll switch over in my project and use those panel labels instead to identify the walls. So I'm going to go ahead and run shop drawings on this interior wall here. It's a basic single layer wall, no sheathing to this guy. There we go. So I have, again, just an elevation view, top and bottom views of my panel. And what we've added with the positioning is that you can add a count. So you can have one sheet for all your panels that are identical, and it'll give you a count in the drawing number. So that's what that little 1 in brackets represents. So again, everything's dimensioned. For those of you who aren't familiar with the multi-layer drawings as much, all of our cut lists are now a Revit schedule. So these are completely live. You can edit these. Sorry about that. And we've done a few options with some of the scheduling as well. So certain things like the custom bill of materials, custom schedules, if you are using those and familiar with those, you now have the options to convert these to a Revit schedule. So all these new bill of material options will have that checkbox, so you can leave them as a plain text box, or you can convert them to a Revit schedule. So last thing I'll highlight just about the shop drawings. You'll notice I have this dimension string pointing to about the center of my wall. And that's a new feature that we've added to the single layer drawings. So we have the option to show the center of gravity. So if you are lifting these panels, you're able to find basically the strongest point if you do need to place a lifting hole. So that is something you can show on your shop drawings and have it be dimensioned. So that really wraps up all the updates and kind of improvements that we've done to our multi-layer drawings, which does now support single layer. So again, just as a general warning, I do strongly recommend using the multi-layer drawings if you aren't already. We have done quite a bit of improvements to those. So last thing, while we wrap up with this webinar, we're just going to show off Some last floor options that we've added. So let's go ahead and switch to our floor module. So simple update that we've done to the floors. If you're familiar with modified generated in the floors, you can click on an existing joist, modify that joist, and you basically have a few different configurations. So you can double it up, triple it, but we have added this new feature now of adding a triple box header, or triple box joist, I should say. So I can select that. You're able to specify the members for each type, member A, B, and C. And then once I say OK, you can just see it already in this option next door. But it'll basically just box out the joists for you and double up your members. So with these built-up options, typically, again, they're done with sub-assemblies. So one new thing that we've added is this model group sub-assembly manager. So what this basically enables you to do is pick any built-up joist options that you have, and you can create sub-assemblies based off of that. There we go. So I'll create a new sub-assembly name. I already had type A in my project. And I'm just going to go ahead and add. And it really just prompts you to grab joists. There we go. It'll pick up the Revit IDs. So those will be included in one sub-assembly. And again, like all of our sub-assembly options that you've seen in the walls, they get their own ID. These parameters can be extracted. You can bring them in a Revit schedule. And all of the options in the floor drawings are fairly similar to the ones in the walls. So again, you can create Revit schedules for these floor panels and extract those types of parameters for the drawing. And last but not least, a little update that we've done. We've added basically a new family for our floor hangers. So for those floor clips and floor hangers that you've seen, you can add those in the member properties, run to your connectors, and now we just have this option to place a joist hanger and a few families to select from. So again, for those of you who aren't familiar with this command as much, it's just placed based on your member to member connection, excuse me. So this will just place from my rim track to my joist if they're both hitting the open side. I can add that, say OK. It's not going to add it to my box headers, of course. So you've got your hangers placed on the joist, and again, like the hold downs in the walls, these are labeled, given IDs, and can be included in a Revit schedule. So that's it for me, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning's webinar. Like Tanya mentioned, if there was any questions in the chat, we'll get back to those and answer them as soon as possible. And this will also be converted, so you'll have this video of the webinar to view afterwards, and you can always come back and refer to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Just wanted to say a quick thank you to Christina, and also thank you to everyone who registered for the webinar. As she mentioned, I'll be sending you a recording as soon as the session is closed. And as always, please feel free to share the recording with any colleagues. All right. Without further ado, we'll be now ending the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.